I'm Kate Compton. I have worked in games for a number of years. I made the planets on Spore. And my GDC history is that my first year at GDC, when I came in as a conference associate, I left the expo floor in tears because one of the HR people took my resume that had half art and half programming and crossed out the arts section. So here we are. So my love for you is to give you all the spite that got me through the games industry and a lot more advice as well. So we'll go ahead and get started with Alexis.
Hi, my name is Alexis. Are we going to show the things?
There we go.
It's me. Hi, my name's Alexis DiGirolami. I'm a lead game designer at Lively, which is a studio under sort of the Keywords umbrella. I've been in the industry for about a decade now, mostly in free-to-play mobile, but I've dabbled in other things. These are the places that I've worked. We'll talk about sort of why I can't talk about most of the projects that I've worked on, but these are some of the companies. My combination of skill sets is game design, programming. I do a lot of team leadership and production work, especially in R&D. I do some writing on the side. I write romance novels in my free time. And then I also am really great at karaoke. Invite me to your karaoke parties, please. And that's me.
All right. Teresa.
Hi, I'm Teresa Duringer, and I'm the CEO owner of Temple Gates Games. But I do have a history working with Kate Compton at Electronic Arts and Maxis. And the basics are I started working at EA. I was doing community management and production. I found myself on the web team, which is a kind of unique place where you can start branching into a few different disciplines at the same time. And I was doing programming of different apps using our API, art, design. And my manager actually told me to get a promotion, I needed to pick a lane. I needed to pick if I wanted to be a programmer or artist or an engineer, or programmer, artist, or a design, and I picked leaving, and I started my own company. But it's sort of unfortunate that sometimes you have to make those choices. So what has happened is I now have a company. We make digital board games. Right now, Dominion is in a beta. We did Ascension, Race for the Galaxy. So I've navigated both the indie space and the AAA space, and in wanting to wear multiple hats. And you can do it, but sometimes it takes a little bit of creativity.
And let's see, Kimberly.
Oh, sweet. Hey, folks, I'm Kimberly Unger. I've been a games industry professional for well over 20 years at this point. I started on the art and animation side, and eventually I sort of crossed over into narrative design. I ended up doing a bit of engineering, and then I ended up landing in biz dev at the end of it all. And I ran my own third-party mobile game studio for about 10 years. And then when we politely closed up shop at the end of all of that, I moved over and I'm now doing content sourcing for Meta, which is probably the first job I've had where I can put my art and engineering and biz dev and audio and like all those pieces I put together over the years. This is the first place I actually get to use almost all of them, which is kind of honestly a weird place to be.
All right. And finally, Virginia.
Hello, everyone. I'm Virginia Smith. I'm currently working as a senior gameplay engineer, but I've also done tons of art, design, game writing, basically all the things you need to make a game, which I have, several of them, self-published, entire games, start to finish. I've also worked on several big-name games, such as Wordscapes and currently Moonbreaker for Unknown Worlds. I've done tons of game jams. I've been mentors of game jams. And tons of, self-published products. I have also been huge into the modding scene, so I've worked in Creation Club for Bethesda as well. And also I'll do 3DUR. I forgot to put that on that slide.
Yeah, I think we all have more skills that could fit reasonably on a slide.
Yeah.
Speaking of, here's our slide with all of our skills, or at least a subset of them. We also, instead of doing Q&A at the very end, I have a Dory open, so hopefully that QR code and then that bit.ly link will lead you both to an online Dory so that you can, if you have questions, I will just kind of salt them in amongst the questions that we've come up with for ourselves. So yeah, first question, just really what made you get started? And some of you have already covered this in your intros, but what was the moment that kind of made you get started on this multidisciplinary path? Like what made that? the accident of your career?
Yeah, I have a very bizarre entry into games. So I did know that I wanted to work in games when I started college. So I started as an art major. Well, first of all, I read about extensively online about how to enter the games industry, and I wanted to be a game designer, and every single article was like, don't be a game designer, you can't get a job right out of school. It's like everything will say that it's so hard, you can't get an entry level, and I was like, well, I do want a job, so like, okay, I'll do something else then. So I was like, I really like art, so I started as an art major in college, and I hated it. I just like didn't like the curriculum, so I was like, okay, like engineers like get work, so like I'll go and get an engineering degree. So that's what I have my undergraduate in, is like a variation of computer engineering. And turns out I'm bad at it. Or rather, I don't have like a natural aptitude that I saw like a ceiling for my career of like, I thought that I'd be able to do pretty well, but not really well. And I'm a high achiever. So I then went to graduate school for interactive entertainment at the Florida Interactive Entertainment Academy. We got a couple of alumnus here. And I was in sort of the design and production segment. And I was like, I'll be a producer. I like people. I like organizing stuff. And I hated it. And so finally, at long length, I finally went and got a design internship out of school. They were able to like help facilitate that. And it's been that way ever since. As a result, though, I have this bizarre set of skills, a very particular set of skills that I have used to apply to my job. It's just happened that a majority of what I do is in R&D. So I do a lot of early production stuff. Like we have a general idea at the studio of what we want to be making, and I do a lot of like solo prototyping or prototyping with like very small teams. And then as I've become more senior, we sort of build up the team and like make a larger group and sort of move into a bigger production environment. It's been great because I can do a bunch of different stuff, but it sort of fell into this bizarre niche of you have to do 3 or 4 different jobs, but also not for the entire duration. Eventually, then it's just management stuff. That was a very long and rambling entry.
Thank you. So that kind of brings up the question, what could you do with your particular skill set that couldn't be done with that same skill set in 3 bodies? What do you need one person in one head to think about?
Well, we can all talk to each other without fighting, for starters.
It's an interesting question, right? Because it's less about what you can't do with 3 bodies versus 1. And it's more about how efficiently you can do it with 1. Right? Like if you've got a team of 3 or 4 or 10 or 50 people, there's a rhythm. And if you have to break that rhythm, it screws everything up. But if you're one person doing prototyping, if you're one person ideating, you can go super fast and you can get all the garbage out of the way before you bring it to the group, and then they can put their skills to use on it. So it really is, it's, I think, a little more about efficient use of time and resources and a little less about, well, you could only do this as one person, right?
Solving problems quickly.
Yeah.
Like being able to context shift allows you to identify issues much faster.
Yeah. And it allows you to hit issues. It allows you to identify issues and sort of figure out where the heavy duty resources need to go.
Yeah.
Right. You can look at it and say, okay, I know this is going to be an engineering challenge. So I can, bring in that person, right? As opposed to I'm going to send it out to the group and let them figure out if it's an engineering challenge, and then you've burned all of that extra time.
Yeah. Sometimes as a resource too, it's great because you identify a problem. So like you see a bug and you're like, I'm just going to like try and fix it myself. Just like very quick. Maybe this will be fast. And then 10 minutes in, you're like, no, this actually turns out to be a thorny thing, but I have more information about how it needs to be solved.
Right.
So you can add that to the bug, and now you've saved someone else a lot of time. And like that can be really helpful, a great resource on the team.
It also greatly improves the quality of your work. So I'm currently been working professionally as an engineer, and I can tell you firsthand that also having the ability to design and make art for the things I do means that I approach my engineering tasks with an eye towards what the design of the feature is going to be. Because when you get a design doc, there's always holes in it. They don't cover every single possible thing that can happen. And if you know how design works, you'll be like, you know what, I need to add this extra screen here to fill in the gap. Or actually, this part of the design really doesn't work now that I'm actually in the code and making the thing happen. And also being an artist as well, I do a lot of UX and UI. I can say, you know, this mock-up they did for the screen is great on paper, but it doesn't actually work when I'm playing with it and testing it. So let me just rearrange a few things. And the end result is I come out with a feature that's, you know, shifted a little bit from the usual design, but everyone's like, actually, yeah, this is a lot better. You know, so it definitely has that element of all in one person, all the different elements can talk to each other inside of yourself without having to go consult with the designer back and forth over email. So it really does improve the quality of whatever you're working on.
And I think, like, to your point, like when you are able to contain that in a small person or couple of people at a company, you have unlocked an ability to navigate the possibility space of what your company can possibly do, because, you know, there's limited headcount, and, you know, it's going to be really hard to fight to open up headcount on something. But if you have somebody who's a superpower unicorn who can like navigate into this area and do something with a really small team or maybe self-contained, then you can open up and creatively flesh out some of these areas that other people they couldn't really operate in. So you can carve out like a little bit of like, where is your value in the company in a different way.
As long as you don't expect us to do the workload of 3 people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and on that, on the both workload and how we can solve multiple problems at a time, I'm interested in, you know, we've all worked on big teams and on tiny teams. I was on Spore when it was 30 people, and even before then, it was an all-unicorn team basically very early on. This is going to sound like less like a question. Isn't it interesting that like the smaller the team, the more everyone has to be unicorns, and the more experimental the team? When you don't know if you're going to have to just do art assets or pivot to large language models or learn networking code, when you're pivoting quickly, having a unicorn on team is really interesting.
It forces you to be scrappy, right? Because you don't have those resources, everyone kind of needs to fill in the gaps so the boat doesn't sink. But as a result, you wind up gaining a lot of skills that you otherwise wouldn't have. Like I've always said that like prototyping and like early game teams, it's a very particular personality that really thrives in that environment. And curiosity is such a big part of that, of like not being afraid to learn something new, being willing to explore that stuff. And like it's such a valuable thing, especially on a small team.
Yeah.
I think like the point about unicorns having a really important role in early game development is because a lot of times if you work at a big company, eventually they may invest in certain tools, certain, you know, pipelines and systems for you to like pull in config files so that a designer can design a tutorial in like text files or something like that. But, you know, that takes time, that takes decision making on where you're going to be investing those tools, engineer resources. And if you have the skill to just be hooking up, like everybody on this panel, to be like hooking up things directly in code, you don't have to rely on those things. And then you can start pushing the project forward, defining what the project is going to be at an early stage.
And it's often the inverse at larger studios. Like when I teach the intersection of art and engineering. One of the things I tell my students is, look, the bigger the studio, the more focused your role is going to be. So if you really love being able to do all these things pretty good, then you want to look at the indie level. You want to look at the small studio level. But if you are the kind of person who wants to laser focus, who wants to deeply understand the engineering behind lens flares and nothing else, that's where you go for a larger studio, or you go to Hollywood.
So about team size, I was in an interesting situation when I was at PeopleFun where we scaled up from like 10 people to almost 100, and I was along for the ride. And what I definitely found is as the team sizes got bigger, which production did that thinking we'll just throw more bodies at the problem, it'll get done faster, is that things tended to slow down overall. Because everyone tended to be specialized, and they're like, oh no, Virginia, you can't do the engineering design and the PM now, you're just the engineer, which made everything take longer. So if you do run a big company, or if you're watching this later on GDC Vault and you do run a big company, I would advise, even in a very large studio, try making smaller teams. You'd be surprised at the people on the team have skills that maybe they didn't even know about. Like, just give them the challenge, and they'll often rise to the occasion and be like, hey, actually, I can do a little bit of design, or hey, I actually am kind of good at UI. You know, And you'll find that the teams overall can iterate much faster. Of course, if you have the person who only wants to do shaders, then okay, put them in a corner and let them do shaders. But if they if they want to try doing more things, or want to be on that more dynamic, scrappy team, try the smaller team format.
If there's anything that you should take from this talk, shader developers belong in a corner. That's the one.
Shame on them.
That's the takeaway. Sound clip that.
So that's interesting. We talked about kind of as teams develop into larger teams, you start to get this kind of more rigid structure. Things start to have larger boundaries. I know Teresa can certainly talk to this, but when I was at Electronic Arts, I actually came in as an art intern, just because that was the internship that they had available. And that locked my career for the next 8 years, and I tried unsuccessfully to switch. So I guess the question now is, all right, we know how effectively we can work in small, porously defined teams. How, as a unicorn, do you negotiate large, and with some success, negotiate larger, more structured kind of institutions?
It's a really interesting problem, and ultimately it does come down to building trust with your team and with your organization. Mm-hmm. I have done this successfully. I have done this unsuccessfully. This has definitely not happened at certain companies where basically teams decided, no, designers don't get to touch code. Stay away, beating me away with a stick, of no check-ins. But the places where it's worked really well, a lot of it comes down to collaborating with the discipline that you want to work with. So sensing opportunities to work with tools dev to develop something together that could be really beneficial for both of you, and taking it as an opportunity to learn. A lot of times people in other disciplines might not want you to encroach on their space because they're afraid that they're going to have to clean up after your mess, which is a valid concern. That does happen sometimes. But I think coming to it from a position of, I do have some knowledge of this subject, I'm interested in learning and getting better, here is how I feel we can work together. That generally is a great approach to building that trust and allowing you to collaborate on small things that then allow for bigger things.
I think, sorry.
Oh no, I was going to say it's very relationship centric, right? Mm-hmm. You have to build a rapport with the team that you want to interact with, and they have to understand that you're not going to just come in and make a big old mess. Because in part of it, depending, when you get up to the larger and larger companies, people are goaled and judged by management versus specific things. And there's a chance there that if you come in from the side, you're going to sort of skew their results and run them into trouble down the line. So you do find people who are very tightly focused on the end goal that is going to define whether or not they get paid more next year. Right. And so there is some sense, and that's why I call it relationship building, right? You have to be sensitive to the whole picture when you come in like this. And if you are, a lot of times you can build that rapport and you can drive that understanding. Whereas if you just sort of come in from the side and say, hey, look, I did this thing here, that never goes well.
That's egocentric, right?
Yeah.
It's about showing off, not about making something great.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. I actually want to come at that from the other direction, and sometimes that does work. Because not in terms of framing it as an ego trip, framing it as people often won't believe you until they see it.
Fair enough. Yeah.
So sometimes it's easier going from a direction of engineering to something else than trying to go into engineering, because there's often blockers on check-ins and stuff. But if you're going from art to design or design to art or engineering to any of those, sometimes if the trust building isn't working, or just no, we love you, but no, sometimes it helps to just go do it and then come back and say, hey, I made this thing. Can you review it for me? Just framing it as an exercise. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they'll be oh, this is actually pretty good. Let's talk about this. Or it'll be actually, no, this sucks. Go hide in a corner.
With the shader
This is bad, and you should feel bad.
But sometimes if the trust building isn't actually opening the door, sometimes just going and doing it on a small scale will actually show them that you have the ability to do the thing you're talking about and crack that door open for you.
Mm-hmm. So I think, there's a lot of big advantages to working at a big company. There's payroll and healthcare and stuff like that. There's reasons you might want to do it. It it is harder to be a unicorn at a big company, I think, because you run into these relationship issues where, like, stay off my line, like, don't touch the system I'm in. I think there's a couple of things you can do to deal with that. And one of them is find ancillary projects. That could be R&D, that could be prototyping. Find something that's not necessarily the thrust of what the company is doing, and you're going to be able to occupy a larger space within that. But there's risks to doing that too. There's risks to now the corporate flowchart does not align for someone working on your type of project. So you have to deal with that.
But I think talk about a lot of your work. That's a part of it too.
Yeah, I think that when you're worried about stepping on somebody's toes, something that you can do is if you can avoid working on when you're spreading into a broad space with your skill sets, if you can find something you can be a little bit more autonomous on, it's kind of fallen out of favor, but there used to be 20% time at companies like Google where you can do the thing where you carve off a little time, spread your skills into something. And then if you can prove to the company that that thing is valuable, then that can open up, to larger teams in the future. So I think you just have to be strategic and understand, are you trying to climb the corporate ladder or the corporate flowchart? Does that align with the quest that you're trying to solve in your life?
Yeah, I really like that. I like the, how do you demonstrate to somebody else that your work is valuable? It is when there's not a template for it. Mm-hmm. And we've actually got a couple of questions from the Dory, things like, what can I do in interviews when the recruiter dismisses me because jack of all trades, master of none? Mm-hmm. Or knowing what AAA looks for in specialization. How do you manage or present your portfolio as a unicorn while applying for specialized roles?
Well, first of all, remind them that the end of that quote is, jack of all trades, master of none is better than the master of one. Mm.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And it's, this is where we get into the art of resume building, right? There is a misconception out there that everything you've ever done needs to go on your resume. It doesn't, right? Your resume needs to be fine-tuned to what you're applying for. And that means you're going to leave skills off. You're going to leave experience off. Jobs that you've had, you worked at Dairy Queen that one time for 6 months in the summer. You don't put that on your resume unless it's, unless you have no other position that you've worked at, right? Over time. And if you look at the resumes of anybody who's been in this industry, especially given the speed at which people come into and go out of studios, 5, 6, 7, 8 pages long, nobody wants to read an 8-page resume. You
Please don't
trim that sucker
resume
down to 1 page of the coolest stuff that is pointed exactly at the job you want, and the rest of it can reveal later.
Well,
right.
in interviews too.
Yeah.
Then it's a pleasant surprise of yes, I'm applying for this one job in art. However, I do have technical art experience, and this is some other stuff that I've done that has been really helpful. Mm-hmm. And then at the interview stage, when you can actually speak to it directly to a human being and not necessarily to a computer, that can be a pleasant thing that the interviewer discovers.
And this also gives the recruiter or the interviewer the opportunity to steer you into a different role. If you're applying for a role, if you work at a really big org like EA, Meta, wherever, those recruiters have multiple jobs in their pocket that they're hiring for. And they may interview you for job A, but they're like, dude, they can do these other things too. Let's steer them to job B. I've already got plenty of people for job A, but I have, only 2 people for job B, right? It gives them the opportunity to discover your extra skill sets and then steer you towards something else they may have that is either a little bit earlier, hasn't been, open to the market and have as many resumes yet. It gives them a chance to find a fit for you rather than, okay, here's the resume, here's the job, boom, you're done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something I've also noticed when either I'm mentoring people and trying to get them jobs, unicorns almost never go in through the front door because it's completely unreasonable for somebody to post a job and say, I need somebody with node expertise, knitting practice, and 3D modeling skills.
If that's a job, don't apply for it, guys.
That's a red flag. Yeah.
But if it was small amounts of that, so a lot of these things tend to be back channel networks. So was this how you found your job, or did you get to go in the front door and then just cause trouble?
So I went in the front door and then caused a lot of trouble. So yeah, my advice is actually coming at it from the other end. pick your core skill that you can market yourself best at. I mean, even for unicorns, we typically have one thing that we're like the best at of all of them. Maybe not by a lot, but at least a little bit. And then come in from that angle and sort of, tack in on the side, oh, I can also help you with these things. And, but something to keep in mind while you're doing that is I actually almost bombed a job interview because the interviewer stopped the interview and said, are you sure you don't actually want to be applying to an artist job instead? I was applying for an engineering job, which was a huge warning siren in my head when that happened because it's like, oh my God, I got to quickly course correct this. So I had to reassure him, oh no, the art is going to help the engineering, not be like I'm going to do art and, poo-poo engineering. That's often the way to get yourself in the door is a lot of companies don't understand the idea of someone who is equally good at both. Like they think that, oh, they're going to want to do one or the other. And what if I hire them as an engineer, but now they want to be an artist? I need an engineer. So like I said, good way to get your foot in the door is to accentuate how those other skills help the big main one. And then once you're in the door, you can like break out all the things like a multi-armed Hydra and,
Yeah, I agree with the panelists. I think it is important to strategically conceal, and I wish that wasn't the case. I mean, in a perfect world, everyone would have the capacity to remember everything about everyone, all the nuances and complexities of all of us special unicorns out there. But in the real world, you are competing with specialists for those jobs. I think if you have a lot of skills and you're coming into a job interview, use the skill understanding the assignment. Have empathy for the fact that it took a gargantuan effort probably to open up this job rec in the first place. It took multiple levels of sign off in the organization and people pulling political favors to get this open rec in the first place. And if you come along and you try to wiggle that role in the interview into something that you want it to be, you're showing a little bit of disrespect for the fact that like so much work has already happened to even get this in front of you. And then relax, because the reality is like the shape of the role once you're past the door can be driven a little bit in the direction that you want it to go into. So when I credit myself on the games that I work on, I credit myself as a designer, but my real actual role is amoeba. I am an amoeba and I have these tentacles and they fill into the skill gaps in my team where it needs to happen to move the project forward. And a lot of unicorns are going to be doing that. You're going to be like understanding and seeing other people's quests and seeing what people are good at, and you're going to be helping and filling in. Like, I think a lot of unicorns are really good at work improv, where you're yes-anding and you're seeing what happens on the inside and how you can make it better, and you're using that curiosity that you're bringing to the table, but you don't need to say all of that at the interview.
Yeah. I did like that one of the questions was, how do you introduce yourself at parties? What do you do? And I like that kind of wrapped up in that is this storytelling about what we do. Yeah. So I am also a big amoeba of complexities, but I often describe myself as, bringing AI to people that wouldn't otherwise reach AI, or the Ms. Frizzle of AI, and all that like nicely wraps up in very brief a few words like, okay, there's creativity, there's teaching, there's AI, there's technical skills, and it allows me to like have a nice little box that I can present to somebody that they can unpack at their leisure. So do you have any sort of glib descriptions of what you do that lets you unpack?
A lot of times I say I professionally make stuff up. Like that's like the cute answer. Yep. But usually I'm just like, I'm a game designer, and then everyone's like, what's that? I don't understand. But those are people outside of games.
Yeah, mine's similar. My cute one-liners, I make shit go. At the end of the day, every single job I've ever had has involved me making things happen.
When the Starbucks baristas ask, I just say either I'm a game developer, or like you, I say I make the trains run on time.
Yep. Nice.
Yeah, I think probably most of my friends, if I see some familiar faces in the audience, you probably have no idea what I do. I feel like it's really hard to communicate, and I need to go to like some kind of workshop to communicate it. But fortunately, like, I don't really have to communicate it all the time. Like, I'm just, the company is going. So,
yeah. I know we mentioned, okay, like, you come in as an artist or you come as an engineer and they might route you to artist. One of the spiciest questions we had in our pregame talk was, how do you get paid as the highest paid field that you're in? Again, I came in as an artist who did coding for 7 years and got paid as an artist.
Yeah, if anyone has the answer to this, I'm listening. Because if I were smart, I would have come in as an engineer, but I did not.
Absolutely. I think that there are a lot of roles now, especially that that do accommodate unicorns. And a lot of these roles have technical at the beginning of the title. Are you a technical game designer? Are you a technical narrative designer? Are you a technical artist? All of these things are probably going to be doing a little bit of programming and a little bit of some other skill. But the problem and the reality is anytime you take a job that has technical at the beginning, you're also taking a pay cut. Like if you just go into a job that says programmer, you're going to be making more money. So you have to make a decision, are you going to go into the job and then do the sort of like fighting work, like bottom-up management to wiggle that role? Or are you going to just go into the technical role and understand that that is a reality?
So once you're actually in the role, even if you screwed up and applied as just a low level artist or QA person, but you will do all this other shit. So my advice for new people who are not in the industry yet, or maybe you're just starting out, write down everything you do every single day. And if you work on a big project or accomplish something big, write down all the details about it and who was involved. So then when, annual review time comes out, you whoop out your scroll and here is your big list of reasons why you deserve a big raise because you made all this shit happen. Do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, great advice.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I've noticed is, looking at piles of resumes, there's always a lot more people applying for art positions. And I think this feeds back to what you said when they looked at your resume and said, are you sure you don't want to be an artist, right? There's a little bit of danger in floating art skills because recruiters are like, okay, this person's going to apply for one thing, then they want to join the art team because art is sort of the love, art and game design are sort of the love piece of this. That's the passion play.
Roles.
Yeah, those are the shiny roles. Like when I was first coming out of art school, we were talking to Disney recruiters at the time. And everybody wanted to be an animator, right? But animation paid like $25K. It was a wretched, wretched pay scale. And the reason it was is because they would have 250 resumes for animator. And then you would have like one resume for the guy who wanted to learn how to animate water photorealistically, right, using their software. And that was the higher paying role, right? And that's where we get into the problem with, or the benefit with specialization, right? Is those specialist roles tend to pay more because a lot of people come in targeting the generalist role and they come in targeting sort of the passion play as opposed to the sort of the bits that maybe require more technical expertise or require a level of specialization that maybe not everybody think is really cool. Like not everybody wants to spend their entire day designing particles.
Yeah.
But
That
if you
shader
can-
programmer is in a corner, but they are making
but they're
money.
getting paid really well for it.
Yeah, there are jobs that many people just don't know exist. So like pipeline engineer, technical artist, audio engineer, all these
QA.
things that are like little cross-platformy kind of jobs. And I just do art and technical. I have no idea what they are on the biz dev side of all the kind of difficult to discover jobs that you didn't know were the perfect fit for you.
Yeah.
So as part of that, this is going to be a little, actually, have any of us been in a hiring position before?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, how do you, when you are looking to hire unicorns, what are your strategies? Where do you look? How do you tailor your job proposals? Who do you back channel ask? How are you seeking people out to get the right impossible unicorn that you're looking for?
So crafting a job rec when you're looking for a unicorn is a little bit tricky, right? Because as we mentioned earlier, if it says I need a unicorn, that's a red flag, right? For anybody who's applying for the role. But there's even if you're a unicorn, there's a core skill set that you need to employ or that you're expected to employ. And then the other skill sets that might be needed are additive, right? So you always lead with that first core skill set. But when you craft the rec, you illustrate that there's opportunities to go broader, right? You illustrate that, okay, you're going to be intersecting with the following teams, right? Mm-hmm. And then that gives people who are applying an opportunity to showcase those other opportunities. So it might be, I need a prototyping engineer who's conversant in C#, has a lot of experience with Unity, but they will be expected to intersect with our 2D pixel art team, and they will be expected to intersect with this other team over here, and that helps set the breadth of knowledge expectation, and then you uncover the rest in the interview, right? And you figure out sort of where their real real skill sets happen to lie.
Having the like requirements and nice to haves also helps of like, here's definitely what the role is. And then these are sort of, this is the vibe of the team. And like, you're working with a team of people who have cross-disciplinary experience. So like, yeah, like setting the scene in that way, I think can be really helpful. I think the key is keeping it broad enough that it's not like we're expecting a unicorn who can and will do everything. Because it's definitely like a big red flag in a job rec if they're saying that they want you to do 3 jobs. Like creating boundaries of like what you are and are not willing to do. Like you should not be doing 3 people's work. That has been my entire career, has been learning to set these boundaries. And like it's really hard to do when people expect you to help that much.
Yeah. One of the questions was about like, what words do you use other than unicorn in a job posting? And I like this intersecting. And especially like mentioning which teams you're collaborating or embedding closely with, but are not expected to do their jobs. So like, must be able to speak engineer, does not have to do engineer.
Totally.
Yeah. As when you mentioned, holding boundaries so that you don't do everybody's job. There've been a couple of questions on the Dory of, we can grow in so many directions at any point, especially people who are doing their own indie startups, but even people on any team, and especially as things get weirder and new skill sets, LLMs and other weird stuff coming down the pipeline suddenly like comes onto our field. How do you maintain boundaries of saying, all right, this is a time when I need to add yet another socket onto my skill set? And when do you decide, no, this time I'm not going to amoeba out into that tasty looking direction?
I would love to say that I've like mastered this and like it's better. I like still really struggle with this very much because like I want to help, and so it's like, yeah, I like have like 5 minutes here to like do this big task. I do think that working with production, if you have a producer on your team or someone whose job it is to manage resources, working in tandem with them to ensure that your the boundary that you set before someone asks you is actually held, I think has been a godsend for me. Like it's really helped a lot to like have really good relationships with your producer who can help like basically whack people away when they're trying to ask favors so that you can stay focused on the things that you're doing.
I love that. If saying no is not one of your many skills, you can outsource that.
Yeah. Like there are people who are great at saying no for you.
And clear communication, I think, is key. Like, I've straight up told my current boss, okay, yes, this is my skill set. No, this is not something I'm going to do. Like, and that's, you don't have to be a dick about it, right? But setting, because it is, when you're a unicorn, it is very easy if you have, like, for example, I can do data entry for days. Like, this was one of my original core skill sets. I'm very fast. I'm very good. I will not do it for my day job these days. But when it pops up that I know how to do it, almost invariably somebody comes to me and says, hey, I need to have 2,000 values entered into this spreadsheet. Can you take a look at this? And I'm like, no, sorry. Because it'll get you bucketed into that role, and it's a role maybe nobody else wants to do, or they can't hire somebody else to fill, and then you're stuck with it, right? And you can't escape it because it's valuable. It's the kind of valuable role that they need filled, but they can't bring in, an outside contractor, or they can't bring in somebody else to handle it. So as a unicorn, boundary setting, I think, is key, and it all comes down to communication style. Right. Like I've developed a very, very clear and upfront communication style over the years because it works. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes I get the boot, but most of the time, the people I work with are once they figure out that I'm just being clear as opposed to being a dick, it works very well because there's no more miscommunication. They know that if I say this, okay, boom, that's over. Let's move on to the next thing. Mm-hmm.
So I've been in exactly that situation before where I was basically put on a prototype team by myself, and expected to like churn out these different games. So I was kind of promised help, but it didn't materialize because they knew I could do it by myself. And so what I ended up saying, because you don't often want to say no, like especially if you're a new person or a low level person, you feel like saying the word no means, oh, you're going to get fired because you're not supposed to say no to your boss, right? So what I framed it as is I have, X amount of time, just assuming that that overtiming is not on the table. Just don't even bring that up in the conversation. I only have 8 hours a day to do all these things. Would you rather me do the engineering work, or would you rather me do the artwork or the designing work? And put it back on them. Let them pick what it is that they actually want you to do. And when you frame it like that, it forces them to actually think, oh, I'm trying to make this person do 3 jobs in one. Okay, maybe they need a little bit of help, or maybe we need to expand the timeline. But yeah, put it back on them is what I would say. Don't use the word no. Lay out your time. Here's what I can do. Here's what I'm not able to do. What do you want me to focus on? And then they have to describe what they actually want.
Yeah. All right. There's so many questions in the dory. There's a lot of people who are really interested in how do you get into this?
Can I just comment on that really quick?
Yeah.
When I was telling my friends that I was doing this talk, people came out of the woodwork. Everybody, I think, is like a closeted unicorn, because so one of my friends said that the comment that I think is kind of wraps up why this is an important talk, which is it is way more problematic than you would think to have multiple skill sets in this industry. We've all faced weird barriers and boundaries and issues and friction because we have multiple skill sets, which is so unintuitive. You would think that's just going to help you.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about difficulties. When I know we've all alluded to a couple of them, but what is something that has caused you friction or roadblock being a unicorn? And then either how did you get over it, or how did you wish that somebody would have helped you get over it?
I've struggled in interviews a lot. That tends to be where once I'm in the door and working on stuff, I don't think that it's been a problem. I tend to get a lot of, especially from technical directors or technical interviews, testing me to try and get a very formalized knowledge. And the way that I talk about my programming style, it's the difference between being a good home cook and a chef. I make stuff and it tastes really good, but it's not necessarily the prettiest thing in the world. I am not necessarily using the techniques that would be expected from a taught chef. So as a result, when people are describe the difference between a dictionary and I could look it up on the internet, because that's what I would do if someone were to ask me that in my actual work. But I'm not going to regurgitate a bunch of coded knowledge about something. And as a result, I have multiple times been told that I'm not technical enough for a role, which is really frustrating, because it's well, you never gave me a tech test. You just asked me some random questions. And that's very frustrating, where it's you feel you're just being
these arbitrary, we know that our field is incredibly fractal.
Yeah.
And I teach computer science, and there's probably almost no information in that I share with the other high-level computer science professors. And so I would fail any of their intro tests.
Yeah.
And I have in fact failed the Google interview process. Yeah. Does anybody else have things that they've gotten over, or you've never gotten over?
I have a similar thing. I feel I don't market myself really as a programmer, even though I do programming in my job. I know how to match braces and write for loops and while loops, and I know ifs and ands and ors, and I can read structs and functions, and I can check in code that doesn't break the build, and I can merge my code. But I'm still not the top programmer out there. And so for me, what really works is working on extendable games. And I found that this is so for me, I'm coming in to board games, and I'm making apps for board games, and good board games have lots of expansions. So a place that I can sort of fit my tech expertise in that might not get me a regular programming job is I can come in and say, okay, this board game, we've already, the rockstar programmer on my team has already established how we're going to hook up the gameplay programming. And I come along and do the gameplay programming for expansions. And that's great, because I can kind of follow along a template and figure out here's the tables that we use. I make our tutorials using C tables, and I'm able to hook up my stuff, and that, you know, the technical part of my job enables me to not have to play a politics game when I want to iterate on my creative work. If I want to iterate on my audio or my art or my UI, I can do that myself without having to like pull favors or bother someone. And so that really helps me a lot. But at the same time, I feel like if I'm going to go out there and try to get a programming job, I'm not sure I'm going to pass the programming test, and it is a little bit stressful. I feel like, you know, it ends up, I don't know if I'm speaking for all of us up here, but I feel like what ends up happening is I feel really comfortable with people I've already worked with who know my skills versus like necessarily like marketing my skills for a first time to someone who hasn't worked with me.
I've followed the same boss to 3 jobs now because she knows I'm good, and it's great.
The solution here is obviously for everyone in the audience to pair up and start an indie studio together.
Yeah.
You'll be unstoppable.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, in my career, I seem to have swung between 2 extremes, where on the one hand, I am put in a box and told, don't touch the other boxes. Or on the other hand, I'm told, go do all the things. You can do all the things. I'm not sure there's an actual silver bullet solution to this. My approach has been to really only apply to smaller companies, because I'd much rather be expected to do more than told not to do other things. But there is going to be a balancing act there. And really it's talking to people, communicating well, take a course on communication. It'll help you a lot. And managing expectations, and also just proving that you can do these other things to open up those doors. Like I said, I don't think there's a silver bullet answer here.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's where we get back into the relationships of this industry, right? Like, I mean, if everybody goes and looks around this room, the people around you, you know, all of you who are just starting out, the people around you are going to be the people you make connections with, and are going to, because once you've been doing this for 4 or 5 or 6 years, you stop applying for jobs quite so much. And the people you know in the industry say, I need this skill set, and I know this person over here who can deliver this skill set. And it's a much lower risk jump for them to make, to bring in somebody that they've worked with. They may not even know you very well, but they were on a team and they heard in a review that you did this one thing really well, and then they decided to reach out. So a certain amount of that happens after you've been here for a while. And for all of you who are brand new and just starting out, all the people you here at GDC with, this is the group, right? Make friends, shake hands, exchange business cards. Mm-hmm. You never know where everybody's going to end up, right? And you know, by working together and by elevating each other, you can help sort of you know, make sure your resumes are closer to the top of the pile, because you know this guy and the two of you have worked together. Yeah. And that's actually one of the things that they do sometimes ask is, who else in this industry have you worked with, right? I mean, once upon a time it was, who are your references, right? And nowadays it's, you know, if you go to apply for a company and you know somebody who works there, you reach out to that person and say, hey, I'm applying for a job. Does your boss suck? Will the job pay what they say it will? And, you know, hey, can you go tap the recruiter for me and say that you know me, right? That there is that you can say thumbs up or thumbs down on whether or not I can do the job. The other side of that is that when you do that and you reach out, you know, that you have to let them do their own thing. Right. So if you reach out to somebody and say, hey, I used to work with you and I want to come work with you again, if they didn't like you, you kind of got to roll with that. Right. And if they kind of think you sucked, you got to roll with that too. Right. You can't like get bitter about these kinds of things, because it is a little bit of sort of back channeling that you're doing. Yeah. But, you know, once you have one job and then you have the second job, and then it starts to, once you have that established experience base, you're directly applying less and less often over time. And then eventually nobody comes to you for jobs at all, and you go and retire and live on a boat with your cats.
The good news is, I will say that, like, once you are in a company, if you have a unicorn skill set, everybody knows you. Like, Kate and I worked together at Maxis. Everybody knows Kate. You know,
I also baked a lot of cupcakes.
That's true. That's true. Another skill set. Everybody knew me. You know, I'm working on these little apps using our API. And the thing is, when you're working, Kate did visual effects. She's just scripting. She's made a programming language that I constantly run into people who use. Once you're working on like these multi-skill projects, you can make small things fast, and then people find out about them quickly. And then everybody is just familiar with you. So you do rely a lot less on I interviewed once and then I got into the industry, and then I've never needed to interview for a job since then. Like, you don't necessarily. So even though it's hard to interview as a unicorn, it might not just come up that much.
So I'm going to propose a very unorthodox method of getting into the game industry, which is kind of the one I took, which is take your favorite games, mod them, put your mods everywhere. What you're doing is you're creating a portfolio of game design. Or if you're really into game jams, do lots of game jams. Save all your games. Save the source code. Again, you're creating a portfolio of games. So if no one is giving you a foot in the door, if your resume right out of college or right out of high school is just not impressing anybody, it's going right in the bin, it's a lot of work, but just on your own time. Everyone's here because they love making games. Make the games. Then show people you've made all these games, and it'll be like, wow, holy shit, they made all these games by themselves. You're hired. So that's my advice there.
Yeah, small and finished is better than big and unfinished.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's one of the secret sauce things you can do to get in, right? Because if I'm looking at a stack of 200 resumes, everybody who's built a janky little mobile game that they shipped on their spare time goes to the top of the pile, versus people who have come out with a college degree and maybe have a couple of things that they've worked at that were really big, or worked on that were unfinished and it was student work. Like, you cannot get around the fact that games is a passion play. Right. We churn through so many people in this industry. The ones that stick around are the ones who love this stuff. And the sooner you can illustrate that to recruiters, the faster you can get in. My very first job was based not on my art degree, not on my English degree, not on any of the other stuff I'd done. It was based on the fact that I was doing Unreal Tournament art asset mods. That was literally what got my foot in the door. Is in my spare time I was making textures for Unreal Tournament because I thought it was really cool. And that was the secret sauce, right? That was the thing that I was willing to spend the spare time. That's not to say that you should spend your spare time on behalf of your employer making games, right? To be clear, that is a clear line that needs to be drawn. But the idea that you love doing this enough that you will just do this, whether or not you're getting a paycheck, is one of those things recruiters will look for. Right, is they want to see that you're doing this anyway, at whatever level.
And another good thing, just a soul deep reflection for yourself. If you find the idea of working on a game in your spare time to be super tedious and aggravating, this probably isn't the right industry for you.
Mm-hmm. I think to their point, if you are coming into an interview situation and you want to zero in and understand the assignment and focus on a skill set, that's great. If you do tack on a couple of games that you've made, it shows two things that are very valuable. One, initiative. That initiative is going to generalize across a ton of problems that your employer is going to have, and they're going to love that. And two, it shows that you have a skill set for spackling. You understand what it takes, the skill to combine and bridge two disciplines or more. You understand what it takes to combine the audio and the timing and the visual effects, the programming and the art, all those things. You can have a game where, let's say you have an artist, an engineer, and a designer, and they're all sort of like B-level people, B-level skills. Your game can still be a C-level game because the game itself, the product, is not necessarily an average of the skill of those disciplines. It also really relies on things not falling between the cracks where the disciplines meet. And if you can make your own game, yet that demonstrates you understand how to bridge, how to spackle over those meeting points between disciplines.
Yeah, I think we all know that, or at least people who have been in the industry long enough know that the invisible skill that every game designer who is successful has, that is necessary for any unicorn or any game designer, is the ability to keep going when game design is tedious, is miserable. We don't want to keep going, and yet you keep going anyway. And that is the hardest skill to identify in people, except with these shipped games.
So I've worked on a lot of independent projects that I've taken from start to finish myself. And you're always really excited when you open up a new Uni project or start working on some new concept art. This is the golden hour, right? Mm-hmm. And there's going to come a point, maybe 20, 30 hours in, that you're going to fucking hate it. You're like, this piece of shit, I don't want to work on this again. I want to go do whatever else. I want to go drink. So you need to push past that. So it's going to suck. And you're going to hate it. But you'll find if you just open up the program and just say, I'm going to do just this one thing. I'm going to implement this one dialog box. I'm going to put this one piece of art in. You'll start rolling with it. You'll be like, okay, that actually wasn't that bad. Let me do another little piece of art. Let me add this one other little feature. And before you know it, you spent 6 hours in your game and you're a lot farther in than you were before. So it's like the important part is keep going until you're done, because that shows perseverance, that shows self-innovation. Those are like the golden goose eggs for any employer or for making your own studio if you want to pair up and make an indie studio with somebody in this audience.
And again, that's like as unicorns, we can, or as anybody, we can patch over our lack of skills with other people. So if you have friends, you can support them in getting past the really ugly times. Mm-hmm. So we're running almost out of time. I think we got 4 more minutes left. I would like to ask one of my questions. What is one skill that you have that you've never gotten to use professionally and kind of wish you were in a situation to use professionally at some point?
Woodworking. In college, I took a sculpture class and I learned how to use an entire wood shop, and I got really good at it, guys. And I've always wanted to like make a toy or something like that and use these weird skills. But I work on digital products, so I haven't been able to use it. One day.
Make a woodworking game.
Yeah. There we go.
Mobile idle game. I'm saying,
Perfect.
2024.
Yeah, I mean, mine's, I'm in a weird spot because for a long time I was either artist or biz dev in this industry, and I never got to use my engineering skills. And now I'm in a position where I kind of get to use a little bit of everything. I do wish I could hook flashy lights up to a lot more things. That's sort of like my current hyperfixation in terms of physical engineering as opposed to digital engineering. But it's a little difficult where I sit right now.
I don't know if counts as something that I'm not doing, because I prepared the question with an answer with I'm really into playing strategy board games, and surprisingly that has come up as like super helpful in just like running a company and assessing the resources available, figuring out what my competitor strategy is, and playing into the hand that I've been dealt. And it's funny that like there's such a direct connection between playing these games and being able to like run a company, but also like run your career. Like as long as you're being strategic about it, you can use the skill. So oil painting for me. I'm a classically trained artist. And, when I was coming up in school, I was convinced I was going to make my living being just a painter. And of course that went, but I would love theoretically to be able to just stick oil paintings in a game, but that doesn't happen. So.
Yeah. CAs, do we go to 10? Okay. Yeah. So we got 1 more minute. In the 1 minute remaining, is there anything that you want to tell the audience, either senior people looking to hire unicorns, senior unicorns, or little baby unicorns just trying to get in the door? What would you tell them that we haven't told them already?
Take out 2 business cards, give one to the person on your right, give one to the person on your left.
I just want to tell people, like, it's really hard to get into a like creative leadership role, but if you are a unicorn, that is a great place for you to use your skills. So hold out, don't give up.
Be stubborn. This industry is a passion play. It will not necessarily go quickly, but do not stop. If you can't do the work and get paid for it, do the work for yourself, and eventually you'll get paid for it.
Marry a shader engineer, the one in the corner. The rich one.
All right.
Also like to do stuff.